In July of 2009, Bo and Kate embarked on their dream hiking vacation to Mount Shasta. Within 24 hours, they were fleeing for their lives. What turned this picturesque getaway into a nightmare? The answer lies in a web of mysteries that have haunted this peak for centuries. Shasta holds secrets that seem to defy explanation. But Bo and Kate's terrifying experience? Well, that's just the beginning. Welcome to the In-Between. I'm Carol Ann, your guide to exploring the myriad of mysteries of Mount Shasta. From Bigfoot encounters to underground civilizations, we're diving into the strange stories and stranger phenomena that make this mountain truly strange. Mount Shasta, an endless source of legend, lore, and mystery. Very few places in this world are connected to as many forms of high strangeness as this place is. You name any kind of brush with strangeness, and it has most likely been encountered on this mountain. Okay, not a kraken.
Hello, beastie.
So today, we are waddling back up to that Chinese buffet of paranormal craziness for a second helping. Question is, how many different entrees can we fit into one video? So let's start with something tasty, but not too filling. In late July of 2009, Bo gets a few days off of work, so he and his girlfriend, who we're going to call Kate, decide to go on a mid-week camping trip to the McBride Springs campground, which is just on the southwest corner of Mount Shasta in the Shasta Trinity National Forest, surrounded by pine trees, beautiful creeks, and lots of hiking trails. Bo and Kate plan this awesome 4-day adventure and arrive at the virtually empty campground. This just keeps getting better. On a picture-perfect warm Monday afternoon, ready to set up their tent and start exploring the surrounding wilderness. They set up their campsite as quick as they can, and within just an hour or two, they're all ready to go. They grab a quick lunch of hot dogs and beef jerky and decide to go on a short hike to stretch their legs and just get a good feel for the area. Neither Bo nor Kate have been to McBride Springs campground before or this area at all, so they are very excited to go exploring. The two of them walk to one of the nearest trailheads when Kate, who's quite the outdoorsman, gets the idea that they should go off trail a little bit and maybe just explore for a few miles and see what they find. Infamously bad idea, right? But Kate says this is a piece of cake. They have a compass and full cell service, and Kate has a photographic memory as well, so finding their way back should be no problem at all. Bo, being completely confident in Kate's outdoor abilities, says, okay, lead the way. And so off into the wilderness they go. After about an hour or so of really taking their time and just enjoying the beauty of the Mount Shasta wilderness, they see a clearing next to a small creek with a large rock that looks like the perfect place to sit and take a break. As they just sit there trying to soak in the beauty around them, Bo can't help but feel a little niggling of unease. But he doesn't know why. This place couldn't be more peaceful. He glances over at Kate, who looks completely peaceful, just watching the flowing water of the creek. Obviously, nothing's bothering her, but he asks her anyway, do you notice anything strange or out of place? She looks at him kind of confused and says, what do you mean? And Bo just shrugs and says, I don't know, I just have this weird feeling. And they sit there in silence for a minute, but Bo still has this feeling, almost like a heaviness or a stillness in the air. And as he's standing there trying to put his finger on the problem, this odor, like vomit-inducingly bad, hits his face. And the next second, it hits Kate too. And they start looking around for the source of this ungodly stench, thinking there must be an animal carcass close by, but they don't see anything. Then Bo looks up. About 30 or 40 feet above them in a nearby pine tree is a dead deer, or what's left of it. The head and front legs have been ripped off of it, with the rest of it just hanging on the branch like somebody had put it there for later. Judging by the look and smell of the carcass, it's not very old, 2, maybe 3 days at most. And even though the body is relatively fresh, it's a hot day, and that smell should have attracted all kinds of flies and insects to start feasting. But they don't see any of that happening. And speaking of that smell, how is it that they were in the spot for like 15 minutes before they smelled it? It's windy, but with that level of stink, they should have been able to smell it right away. Bo and Kate decide maybe it's a good time to head back. But since the way that they got there was pretty rugged and it took them quite a while, they figured that the best bet is to hop back on the trail to get back to the campground. Kate's awesome sense of direction kicks in, and she says the trail's right up there, just beyond that thicket of trees and the small creek. The two of them get up, and with Bo in the lead, make their way over to the creek and around the thicket, where Bo stops dead in his tracks. There, in a small pile, are at least a half a dozen deer heads. And judging by the way the flesh looks around the neck, these heads were ripped off. Not to mention, they're all missing their eyes. And they appear to be no older than 24 hours at most. Now, Bo and Kate are getting a really bad feeling, like something seriously wrong, seriously bad is happening. Who or what is out here doing this? They fight the feeling of panic rising up and take a minute to just collect themselves before continuing on. Takes about another 20 minutes, but Kate's instincts prove correct as they finally find the trail again. However, as they keep moving along, they notice that the forest around them is actually completely quiet. And Bo can't shake the feeling that they're being followed. As they're just about to get back to their campsite, they run into a park ranger and just start pouring out their story of all these creepy things that happened. The ranger, with a look on his face like this is not the first time he's heard a story like this, tells them, "Everything's fine. Don't worry about it. I'll look into it." And with that mild brush off, Bo and Kate make their way back to their campsite without any more drama. But the rest of the evening, they can't stop thinking about it and talking about it. How did that deer get so far up in the tree? And why would somebody leave a pile of deer heads? Why did the ranger not seem surprised when they told him about what they found? And why did his answer sound so rehearsed? Finally, the adrenaline rush of the day's events wears off, and the two climb into their tent and go to bed. Unfortunately, Bo wakes up in the middle of the night and has to pee really bad. So he gets up, maneuvers his way to the tent opening, and starts to unzip the tent. He stops mid-pull when he hears something. He thinks he knows what he heard, but he sits there quietly for a minute when he hears it again and again. It's very faint at first, but it gets louder and louder until he can't deny what he's hearing. He starts shaking, lets go of the zipper, and dives back into his sleeping bag, grabbing his knife for protection, with any thought of going outside to pee completely erased from his head. Eventually, the adrenaline must have crashed and put him to sleep, because the next thing he knows, Kate's waking him up in the morning. Bo goes from 0 to 100 in a complete panic and tells her, "We have to leave now. We are not safe here." And Kate tries to calm him down. "What are you talking about?" And Bo tells her that late last night, as he was getting ready to leave the tent to go pee, he heard Kate's voice whispering to him, calling his name and telling him, "Come to me. I have something to show you." From the woods! And that she had called him by name. Obviously, Kate has no way to explain it, but she's also definitely creeped out. They both decide maybe they just need to pack up and find a different campground. So that's exactly what they do, double speed. As they're driving out of the campground, they see the ranger from the previous day in the campground lodge. So Bo pulls the car over, gets out of the car, and goes in to talk to him. He tells the ranger, on top of all the crazy things that happened yesterday with somebody killing all of those deer, last night I heard someone who knew my name that sounded like my girlfriend whispering to me and trying to get me to follow her into the woods. You know, you might have a serial killer or something. You really need to do something about this. The ranger's feathers get more than a little ruffled. He gets really mad and starts yelling at Bo, telling him, how dare you go off on an unmarked trail, that it's extremely dangerous and that there are mountain lions and bears and they could have gotten lost. And the ranger just keeps getting angrier and more incensed to the point that he ends his tirade by asking them to leave the campground. Okay, no problem considering that's exactly what they were doing anyway, but wow, that reaction's a little over the top. Bo and Kate leave and never go back to McBride Springs campground. Later that afternoon, they find a new spot far away from McBride Springs where they spend the rest of their vacation in peace with no drama. Wow! I wonder if it's the work of one seriously paranormally talented, demented dude, or if Bo and Kate were just lucky enough to have witnessed 2 different episodes of Shasta weirdness in one day. Either way, if you choose to go see Shasta, I would seriously consider not staying in that southwest corner where McBride Springs Campground is located, because this next encounter happens only 1 mile away. The September 9th, 1976 edition of the Mount Shasta Herald runs a story about a Virgil Larson. Virgil, a 47-year-old logger working on a helicopter logging operation south of Cascade Gulch on the lower southwest slopes of Mount Shasta, gets to work about 8:30 on the morning of Friday, September 3rd. The usual routine for Virgil and his partner, Pat Conway, is to park their truck on the side of the road at the top of the hill, then climb their way down a steep slope to get to the logging site. As he's making his way down the slope, Virgil is separated from Pat, but they're still within hearing distance of each other. Virgil hears somebody else on the slope coming toward him. So he looks up and he sees someone coming through the brush about 50 feet away, opposite the side that Pat is on. Well, thinking it's a forest ranger, Virgil shouts at him. But instead of yelling back, the person stops, turns its head toward Virgil, and starts walking again about another 25 feet where it stops behind a bush. When Virgil calls to him a second time, he stands up from behind the bush. That's when Virgil figures out that this is not somebody from the Forest Service. In fact, not even anything human. What Virgil is now looking at, he can only see from the waist up, but he can see that it is covered in black, matted fur that's longest on its head. Doesn't remember anything about its facial features or if it's wearing clothes, but he does remember the smell, which he describes as a half-rotten bear hide. Virgil, freaked out of his mind, takes off running down the slope to find his partner, Pat. They immediately call the sheriff's office and the forest rangers. Carrying chunks of lumber as clubs, he and Pat return to the area about a half an hour later. The creature is gone, but the stink is not. Pat stands behind the bush with his hard hat on a stick to approximate the height of the creature. Their guess? 7 to 7.5 feet tall. Sergeant Bullington, the one who responded from the sheriff's office, says he is quite sure Larson saw something or someone, but would not even hazard a guess as to what it might be. So I did a little more digging into the legends of Shasta. And interestingly enough, many local tribes tell stories about encountering the Shasta people, a group of people described as shorter and darker than the Native Americans, who supposedly lived there first. Legend has it these Shasta folk came from a far-off land across the Western Ocean, and apparently chose this spot because the snowy mountain peak reminded them of home. But when the Native American tribes came to town, the story goes that these mysterious Shasta people were shown the door. They supposedly set off to go back to their original homeland, which they believed had pooled in Atlantis and sunk beneath the waves. This tale might explain where the name Mount Shasta came from, but it's far from the only theory in town. Over time, this mountain's been called more names than somebody in the witness protection program. The Achumawi and Atsugewi called it Yet. The Wintu went for Behem Puyak, and the Modoc opted for Meleikshi. By the time the gold rush rolled around, it had more names than a Chinese buffet has chicken dishes, with names like Shasti, Chaste, Sasti, Saste, Shatala, Shastis, Castis, and Sistis, all being thrown around. Finally, in 1850, someone at the California State Legislature said, "Enough is enough," and said, "Let's just call it Shasta," making it the official name of the county and, by extension, the mountain. So next time you're looking at Mount Shasta, remember, you're not just seeing a mountain. You're seeing a geographical record of countless stories, migrations, and maybe a little hint of terrestrial bipolar disorder. Why do I call it bipolar? Because as this next encounter will demonstrate, this breathtaking, sacred mountain can be hiding some pretty terrible things. Joshua and his dad go on a little hiking trip to Mount Shasta. They drive up the side of the mountain to the parking lot where the old ski bowl trail starts. The landscape is a very barren incline, filled with rocks and boulders and dirt and very few trees. About an hour into the trail, they come across a strange grouping of these large boulders arranged in kind of a circle. Kind of weird, but okay. And they just keep hiking. They only encounter 3 people during the entire hike. The first 2 are a father and son. They meet them on this really steep switchback area that runs along the side of the cliff until you get to the top. And they stop and say hi, make some small talk about the trail, and then go off on their separate ways, with Joshua and his dad heading up and their new trail buddies heading down. Joshua and his dad keep walking up the incline for just a couple of minutes when Joshua turns around and sees the father and son way down the trail. And he thinks, well, how is that possible? It's like a 20-minute hike to get down to where they are. And they made it in 2? There's nobody else around. And even though they're now really small, he can still see the color of their clothes. So it's gotta be them. He points it out to his dad, who says, yeah, that's weird. But they just keep going. Once they finally reach the top of the cliff, there is another weird rock formation that's off to the side of the trail. This time, there are a lot more rocks than before, and these are arranged more like in straight rows, like headstones in a graveyard. Weird, but again, they just keep moving. They reach another steep section with switchbacks, just like before, to get to the top of another cliff. And they keep going until they reach a point where it's pretty obvious they're not going to be able to get any further without climbing gear. So I guess it's time to head back down. When they turn around, Joshua sees a man standing around all these big rocks, just staring at them. He's wearing a button-up shirt, cargo shorts, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. And he's close enough that Joshua should be able to make out his facial features, but it's like he doesn't have any. It's like a blank slate of skin. Joshua says, "Dad, look at this guy," just as the man quickly ducks down behind a boulder. But not all the way. His head is sticking up over the top as he's watching them, like a little kid who thinks you can't see them behind the rock. The next thing Joshua is aware of is that he's standing at the edge of the cliff, with his dad yelling his name and dragging him backwards, pulling him back to the trail. And just for perspective, when I say cliff, I mean cliff. Falling off that spot is almost certain death, and only serious bodily injury if you're lucky. Joshua, sensing he just missed something, asks his dad, "What's going on?" His dad tells them that he just started walking towards the man in the hat, even though his dad was calling to him, "Joshua, Josh, what are you doing? Where are you going?" Joshua's dad tells him, "Stay here," and goes down to the boulders to look for the man, but he isn't there. The only choices at this point are either up or down the trail, which case they would see him, or off the cliff. But he is nowhere to be seen. Makes no sense. Joshua has no idea what happened on that trail, and he has no explanation for it. He's told lots of people about it, and no one has an explanation. So he did a little research and found other stories about encounters with a man with no facial features wearing a hat. And he also read that the Native American tribes from the area view Mount Shasta as a holy site. They believe it could act as a portal to other dimensions, and that it is guarded by spirits whose sole purpose is to protect the volcano. Did Joshua and his dad maybe anger the Mountain Spirit Protection Squad? Or maybe they were getting a little too close to a hidden entrance to Lemuria. For anyone who may not have seen our first video on Mount Shasta, the Lemurians are an ancient race of technologically advanced people who are rumored to live inside Shasta in a city called Telos. But whether that last story was spirit protectors or Lemurians, the author of this next story knows exactly what she experienced. This encounter actually comes from one of our very own in-betweeners, Loves Africa 111. So we're going to call her Sarah. Sarah starts by saying that she thought all the Lemurian stories and stories of the inner city of Telos, the Lemurian city rumored to exist inside the mountain, were total bunk and absolutely ridiculous. She's actually hiked on the mountain before, back in the 90s, and experienced nothing out of the ordinary. But that all changed in 2017. She and her boyfriend, now husband, we're going to call him Charles, who had just arrived from Zimbabwe, decided to go on a camping trip to Shasta in March. Unfortunately for them, the weather's not cooperating and it's pouring rain when they get there. They only have a two-wheel drive car, but they manage to slip and slide their way up this muddy, single-lane dirt road until they find a great spot surrounded by trees that looks like it'll make a pretty good camping spot. So they pull off the road and park. However, it's late and it's raining too hard to put up a tent, so they really don't have a choice but to sleep in the car for the night. At about 2 a.m., Sarah wakes up to find Charles huddled in prayer and mumbling something over and over. He is so wrecked that she can't get him to tell her what is going on. He just keeps saying, "I'll tell you what's wrong in the morning." After a pretty shaky night of sleep on her part, at first light, Sarah asks him again, "What is going on? What happened last night?" This is what he tells her. Charles says he woke up to see a really bright white light shining right into the windshield. And out of nowhere, two men appear on either side of the car wearing shiny suits of some kind. The man on the driver's side taps on the window and asks him if they're okay. Except his lips are not moving. Charles didn't hear him speaking out loud. He only heard him in his head. He tells the man, "We're okay." The man says, "Good," and then disappears instantly. Hearing Charles's story, Sarah laughs, opens the car window, hangs her head out and looks up at the sky and thanks the Lemurians for checking in on them. And between that nocturnal encounter and the magnificent rainbow over the mountain they see as they are leaving, Sarah now knows they exist and thanks them for their parting gift. She leaves Shasta that day believing there is something on that mountain, and with a feeling of amazement to know there is so much out there that we humans don't even know about. And Sarah and Charles are far from the only people who claim to have seen proof of these inner mountain dwelling beings. On June 27th, 1940, the Mount Shasta Herald prints an article by William Cook recounting the claims of one Professor Edward Larkin. Professor Larkin of the Mount Low Observatory tells the journalist that one night, while calibrating his telescope, he notices something, a strange light coming from the mountain. Curiosity piqued, he focuses the telescope on the mountain and finds that the source of the bright light is something he never could have imagined. What did he see? An enormous Oriental-style temple made of carved marble and onyx, whose striking architecture could rival even the temples of the Yucatan. He goes on to explain that he has seen other temples on the mountainside as well, including Greek temples complete with white marble columns, and that these temples feature displays of light that are far beyond our own electrical capabilities. Larkin also tells the Herald reporter that some evenings, while trying to get more glimpses of these beautiful mountainside cathedrals, his view is sometimes obscured by numerous hovering bright lights, and that he believes the temples and the lights can only be from one thing: the Lemurians. Now, the existence of Lemuria has been hotly contested for a long time. Even the author of the article, William Cook, spends a good chunk of the column's real estate on debunking Professor Larkin's claims. But that hasn't stopped the legion of believers in the underground civilization from claiming the reason you can't see it is because either you're not enlightened enough or you haven't been invited by the Lemurians themselves. Kinda hard to counter that argument. Interesting side note. After a time, Professor Larkin apparently gets sidetracked by some other work, and when he's finally ready to get back to studying the Shasta temples of light, he can't find them anymore and never sees them again. The famous naturalist John Muir once said of the spectacular Mount Shasta when first seeing it in 1871, "I was 50 miles away, afoot, alone, and weary. Yet all of my blood turned to wine, and I have not been weary since." And lots of people feel that way about this place. It's now firmly on my bucket list as places I need to check out. This is actually our second episode about this enigmatic natural monument. If you'd like to check out the first one, click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.